Hey, Facebook fans, thanks for joining us again today for a live broadcast from headquarters here in Downers Grove, Illinois. We appreciate the support and we hope that you'll find this topic really interesting. So today I'm joined by our CEO and President, Todd Thibodeau, and we're talking a little bit about the future of work, which is a very interesting, scary, changing topic. So we'll get right into it. You've talked about this before at events, EMEA, ChannelCon, et cetera, and you often cite this study from McKinsey about how big the workforce is and what that looks like. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about some of those highlights and frame up this conversation?
Right. So there's a couple different studies that are articles, reports, studies that I like to reference. And the first one is an article that was done by The Atlantic a few years ago called A World Without Work. And this design looked at 3 different possible futures for a world where AI and robotics rapidly potentially replace us as workers in all kinds of fields, white collar, blue collar, you name it. And they look at 3 worlds. One, there's this dystopian world where machines just become so amazingly efficient that we aren't really needed to do any work. And then what are we going to do with ourselves? Are we going to become artists? Are we going to invent more? I mean, some people talk about that when we actually would have more leisure time, that we might actually invent and innovate even more than we do today. So that's one world. And then how are we going to get paid? Well, these companies would be so fantastically profitable that the government would be able to pay us these universal basic income that you hear so much about today. And there's some trials going on in the US for this, where everybody would receive a certain amount of money to kind of subsist. But then we'd have to find fulfilling things to do. And then another one is where robots take our jobs, but then there's not enough jobs for everybody else, but there's not enough money to pay for that too. So we end up in this world where we don't have enough work. It all kind of descends into Lord of the Flies, and it's a terrible world. And then the other one is it's a really positive, world where we have all this free time and we're able to do all these things and we've become much more fulfilled as people. So that's one story. So I can recommend that to everybody. Just search on A World Without Work, and it's a really, really great article. It's got a lot of good insights. So that came out in about 2015. But then recently, at the end of 2017, there was a study from McKinsey that looked at the real first beginnings of impact of what would happen with automation and robotics. And they talk about in the year 2030, we're going to have probably a global workforce somewhere around 2.7 billion. And at that point, at that inflection point, they think that 40% of those people would potentially be impacted by some form of automation, robotics, AI, where they would either have to completely change career fields or lose their jobs, or they would have to dramatically reskill to be able to do this. And so it's a really good study. So I'd recommend that one as well to people. Look that up. It's free. They'll give you the full report. But they break down the different career fields into things so construction is something which is manual, but it's not regular manual. And they have a term for it in the study. So you have to pick up a brick and you have to lay that, and then you have to go hammer something and you have to cut something. So you have this, you're not on an automation floor where parts are moving past you and you're doing things that are kind of robotic in a sense. So those jobs are pretty protected. So these career fields that are going to be about construction or road construction or building construction. And so some of these places where we have retiring baby boomers and they're going to need all these retirement communities and all this housing and all these things, those kinds of jobs are good. The jobs that they said are at risk are these repetitive manual jobs. Those are the ones that have historically been talked about as being impacted by robotics. But then there's a whole other set of career fields that are kind of white collar in a sense, where AI being paired with automation brings a lot of jobs at risk, and a lot of jobs in the medical field. So there's lots and lots of studies that show that AI is way better at reading X-rays, at reading MRIs. So if I was a radiologist today, I'd be really concerned about my future opportunities. I always use that as an example. But think of a world where you would walk into a hospital and you would interact with a smart AI terminal that would diagnose you. Maybe you had a broken arm. They might send you to a room where there would be a 3D scan of your arm and maybe pick up where the break is. And then you would go to another room and put your arm, and they would 3D print you a cast, and you would never interact with a person. So the medical field is one of those areas where you have all of these repetitive things, and it may not seem like that because there's diagnoses and there's all these human interaction, but how much do you really have that as opposed to? So AI systems are really good at doing psychiatry so far in psychology, They're also really good at diagnosing based on a set of symptoms because they can draw on this massive database. But I'd recommend that article. It's terrific. It really lays out regionally, because you have some countries where it's a big deal for them to keep employees active. So China has huge numbers of people. They don't want AI to really impact their world because those people wouldn't have jobs. Whereas in the Middle East, where the populations of the people who actually are from that region, not excluding the expats, it's very small. They love it because they're able to get rid of expats, and then they're able to have even more leisure time with the money that they're making. So it's really interesting to look at the regional differences. And in the US, we're kind of in the middle of that. I think there's some areas where it'd be good to have it, and there's some areas where it's going to have some serious impact.
Certainly. And it's funny to think about 2030 isn't that far away. It's basically around the corner.
Yeah, I think their conclusions and the trends that they're demonstrating in the study are probably pretty right. I agree with probably 80% of what they've talked about there, especially in terms of the types of fields that will be impacted, but it's not going to happen that fast. Nothing ever happens as fast as that. That's 12 years away. We're not going to see 40% of people potentially massively dislocated in 40 years. Now, I could look like an idiot tomorrow and there'll be some massive advance in AI that will make everything up to this point look completely pointless and stupid.
And if that's the case, we'll be live again tomorrow.
Right. But I'm not sure that's going to happen. But the impacts that they're talking about. So the impact on those 40% really depends on how fast economies grow, how fast the people are able to reskill. It's really a diagnosis for what government should be doing in terms of allocating resources to help people reskill. But it's not going to happen in that time frame. But we should be talking about it and planning for it now. And this is one of the major reasons. This study was one of the major reasons we decided to launch our workforce think tank, so that we could begin to talk about these issues, because the technology industry is going to face the brunt of the negativity around these new technologies. Because are they going to create as many jobs as they take away? History has shown that they do. Horse to car, horse to truck. Before that, horse to train. Trains and cars operated effectively. Automobile or airplanes and things came along. And we managed to create more industries, but are we at a different point now? I mean, I don't want us to come to what I call the fallacy of now, where everybody thinks that what's happening to them now is the most interesting and important thing that's ever happened. But we just don't know. But let's prepare for either eventuality.
And I think that that's slated into our questions. This idea that technology is displacing jobs is not new. We have refrigerators and washing machines and things that completely change the way that we spend our time at home and at work.
Yeah.
And people are still employed today.
Yeah, think about the period from post-Civil War to 1920. During that time, we really got the railroad in a huge way. We got international shipping in a huge way. We got the automobile. We got the telegraph. We got the radio. We got the refrigerator. We got toilet paper during that time too. There's a whole huge set of products that didn't even remotely exist before the Civil War that came to be by 1920. And all of those would have had tremendous impacts. And we had massive immigration into the country at that time too, but they created so much additional opportunity in commerce. And plus we were branching out into the country and we're able to manage that. But is that going to be different this time? Because that was the most, that period of time is the most innovative period, impactful, innovative period in our history by far. Anything we have today doesn't even rival that. I mean, think about, you were born at the end of the Civil War, and by 1920, you had all that stuff. That doesn't include electricity, running water, all these lights in your house, so you could actually stay up after the sun went down. You weren't using kerosene lamps and candles and things in your house. It just dramatically changed. Nightlife became something that could really happen when the electrical lights came. So it changed things in so many ways. The country was dramatically different. It's like we went from bearskins and stone tablets to this amazing world of the 1920s, but we'll see. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence as to how this is all going to play out.
Well, and certainly related, we've been worried about this idea of automation for a very long time. You look at old silent movies, Charlie Chaplin, Modern Times, where he gets stuck in machinery. Do you think that these films, pop culture, do you think that they capitalize on our fear, or they just fuel them?
What's interesting, the Minority Report is the one that is a movie that I really point to about the impact of, I think that was probably one of the best portrayals of what innovation in our daily lives is going to look like. very prescient movie. If you haven't watched it in a long time, go back and watch it and look at all the technology, the mobile technology, the display technology, the car, the electric technologies that are there that really show how life could be. But yeah, I think it's, there's some fear playing into that. The movie Surrogates, the Bruce Willis movie, where people are living through these robots that go out into the world because the world has become so dangerous that they go out and live in the world. So I think you have it on both sides. Then you have WALL-E, where there's
robots save us.
Yeah, there's a feel-good movie for that. But yeah, I think most of the majority probably, 7 out of 10 play on those fears. Especially, I just recently watched again 2001, A Space Odyssey, and that's just automation AI gone to the extreme in a bad way.
Well, and that brings us to a great point. We hear a lot about artificial intelligence and automation. How are they already working together? How are they related? And what are we seeing in the workplace right now?
Yeah, we've kind of had smaller snippets of AI and machine learning in control systems that ran the robots that have been on machine floors since the 70s, even from the 60s. But the thing that's different now is that the technologies that underpin them are much more nimble. They're much more accessible. They can do much broader sets of things. You can bring them in to analyze data. You can use them to power a robot. You can use them to power an electric car. They can make all these decisions. There are some things that they're still not good at, though. They're not good at conditional thinking. They're not good with improvising. They're still not really that great with natural language processing. As much as we think we're interacting with Alexa and Siri, if you've ever looked behind the scenes of those, they're working off very specific terms. You have to talk to them in a very particular way.
Half the time they can't understand us.
Yeah, they don't pass the Alan Turing test.
Yes.
For what those mean. But I think that the marrying of those two has come to the forefront in the manufacturing space, but where it's having the biggest impact long term, and I think will be in these areas where it doesn't attach to any kind of automation, but it's automation in its own sense, the machine learning and AI that impacts the legal field, or impacts the medical field, as we talked about, or impacts data analytics field, or the cybersecurity field. You have all these other fields that have been primarily the domain of human brains being powered by these AI systems that are able to deal with some of these things. The only advantage we really have long term is our dexterity and our mobility, the ability to do things. You see these robots and we're amazed and kind of shocked when they can hop upstairs and chase you and things like that, because that reminds you of movies from the Terminator movies.
iRobot.
Yeah, that one was. Those were pretty nimble though. Or in Westworld, but we're a long way from robots that could do that kind of stuff. Those are not going to impact they may not even impact your and I's life in a meaningful way, that robots that have that kind of ability.
And we've talked a little bit about what work is going to look like in the future. We have these 3 dystopian futures. One is more like Brave New World, one is 1984, one is Ready Player One. Do we have any indication of which one's emerging? Because a lot of these technologies are already here.
Yeah, I don't think we know. We just don't know how different industries are going to adopt these things and the kinds of policies that certain countries adopt. That's the biggest interest point for me right now, is which countries are preparing in what ways for this potential future. So I said, if you're China, you have to employ a lot of people. You have like 500 million people who still live in abject poverty in the countryside. You still need jobs for those people, let alone the people that have moved into the cities. And then you have these smaller population countries. You have places where the populations are shrinking and they're not able to have enough workers to even sustain the economics that they have now. Some of the countries in Europe are facing that. And so they used immigration to help with that. How does it impact countries like Africa and the US or Canada or these other? It'd be interesting. I think that's the more immediate thing for me, is how these technologies will differentially be updated, how they'll be regulated, how they'll be utilized. You're seeing the Justice Department maybe looking more closely at Google and Facebook and others from the hearings this week. It'll just be interesting to see whether we over-regulate it or whether we let the innovation really run wild. And then we're like, wow, we got to put a check on this somehow. But I think it's going to be different, and that's going to create a real different playing field when these things start to have real impact and countries are really embracing it. And if you've ever been to Egypt, everybody's a cab driver there. So if electric or if self-driving cars were perfected tomorrow, you'd put out of work hundreds of millions of people worldwide, because that's the number one career for young men 18 to 31 is driving people and stuff. Boat captains, train people, airline pilots, truck drivers, cab drivers. If all that driverless technology was perfected tomorrow, where would those people work? They have no skills, really. They'd have to completely reskill. And are we prepared to make the investment necessary to help those people reskill into new jobs? They can, but whether they want to or not, because that's an issue too. Some people don't, they want to do what they know, and they don't want to have to learn new things sometimes. And that's a challenge.
Now, certainly we talked about ways that governments are starting to change and adapt. Are there things that we as people can do to prepare for this, or prepare our kids for whatever that workforce is going to look like one day?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest transitions that needs to take place is similar to what we talked about last time, the college system needs to evolve to shorter learning cycles. So if we're likely to have, the number is what, by the time you start working and to the time you hit 35 or 40, you may have had 5 different careers. We need to build an education system that makes that really easy and doable for people so that they can make these transitions. So if those McKinsey numbers come true and we have these massive numbers of people who have to dramatically reskill into another industry, we need to have pathways for them that don't take 4 years. And that kind of commitment to get a whole nother degree in another field, to move to certification programs or training programs, become a bookkeeper in 6 months, become an IT tech in 8 weeks, like our program. I think we need to have more of those pathways. And if we don't create that, the system that we have today with the 2-year associate's degree and the 4-year university degree, and most people don't even make it in 4 years, those are not going to work in that world.
And certainly 2 years is a very long time if you're unemployed today.
Yeah.
Because a driverless car took your job. Yeah. So certainly a lot of things to think about. And that, I assume that's what our think tank is going to be examining, what that looks like.
Yeah, and we're focusing on certainly on that. So the impact of automation, we're looking at how to get people over the confidence gap, to get them to, because the confidence gap doesn't exist in just our industry. It exists in tons of other industries. Someone could say, well, I can't work in tech, but they might also say, well, I couldn't be a paralegal. Or they might say, I couldn't work in the medical field. Yeah, you can. You can learn those skills, but we have to have more mechanisms to do those. So maybe we'll see these popping up of these short-term programs. The online universities are well suited for that. Western Governors, who we work with on our certification programs, does a terrific job, really good program. Check that out if you're ever looking to do anything online. I think they're the best equipped to do that, because the physical universities, they're fixated on the model that they have and they don't want it to change. Mm-hmm. But I think this people feeling like they're downskilling too. People want to stay at a certain level. So if you're a radiologist and you lose your job because AI is doing a much better job of learning and looking at X-rays and MRIs, you want to stay at that level.
Right.
How do you do that? And what do you do? And what skills are transferable? I don't know. It's going to be a tough challenge.
Well, certainly it's an interesting time to be alive, even if it's not the most interesting time to be alive. We're going to see a lot of changes coming forward in the next 5, 10, 50 years. The things that we're talking about today probably won't be the same things that we're talking about in 5 years.
No, and that, again, I got off track there on the think tank, but this idea of confidence gap, the impacts of technology, bringing more diversity into this, and then creating a better pipeline of talent into our industry. Every other industry should be doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. So we're not the only ones with this unique challenge. The trades have had this for a long time. We're having it now with basically zero unemployment in the tech industry and still 600,000 open jobs. And I think the last number was actually 800,000.
Wow.
So people are expanding now with the economy. Even if the economy wasn't as strong, in a year's time, we'd still have 500,000 or 600,000 open jobs with basically zero unemployment.
And these are important jobs that, get at the heart of what it is to operate in our economy. Mm-hmm. Cybersecurity, help desk technicians, services that have to be done by people.
Yeah, and the whole new wave of technology that we'll see come down the road that will marry these automation, robotics, Internet of Things, smart cities, AR and VR. We didn't even talk about those, but those should be lumped in AR and VR in particular should be lumped in with AI and machine learning and automation, because that's the bundle that's transformative. So you talked about the future of work. We're here sitting we have a beautiful office space here in Downers Grove, Illinois, but in a great VR system, this could be entirely replicated.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a company out there, I saw an article just recently, and they operate in a virtual world. They have 200 employees. I think it was a real estate company, a commercial real estate organization, and they operate entirely in a virtual world. And people walk around in the virtual, like Second Life. I always picture it like a Second Life environment. But they built this for themselves to do, and people actually meet each other in the hall and talk and in this virtual world. So they don't have any physical offices. They have 200 employees, and I think they were a $100 million company.
That's kind of wild to think about, though.
Yeah.
Even though the technology's here.
Think about, you're at home and you're wearing some VR glasses throughout most of the day, kind of walking around and meeting people in this virtual environment. That could really happen. That's going to impact transportation, commercial real estate, all these different services that come up around that, let alone the pens and pencils and pads and papers and things that have to be bought. Because I know a guy that's in commercial real estate here in Chicago, and he said that Amazon has been the most disruptive force in commercial real estate in his lifetime. They've never seen anything like the impact of Amazon, all the strip malls, all these other things. But if you start to take people away from the office, I mean, downtowns could be deserted in that kind of world.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we'll see. And people want to be together. So but can they be together in almost the same way in a virtual world? I don't know. But that's an important impact. So I think you have to bundle in virtual reality, AR, augmented reality into that machine learning, AI, and automation bundle.
Well, and it's very interesting to me that we're talking about big level problems like the city of Chicago being full of tumbleweeds, down to we don't need pens and pencils and office supplies in bulk anymore.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly disruptive, and it's the butterfly effect.
Right.
Unintended consequences and small changes suddenly are huge everywhere.
Yeah, you take some industry away, you hope something comes to replace it. But what if we start to do some of these things and they don't get replaced? And then you see economies stagnating, flattening, shrinking as a result of this. And then the money accruing even more to the companies that are building the technologies that underpin the future. So how do we provide, and in particular, worried about these rural communities, mm-hmm. and that they're going to be left behind. The digital divide will become even greater, not just for broadband connectivity, but for access to life-changing and meaningful technologies from a smart city standpoint. Why would you, who's going to invest in smart city technology in a town of 5,000 people in the middle of Arkansas? Not to denigrate Arkansas, but just choosing that as a
it
state.
Could be any state.
It could be any
state. Country.
But yeah, who's going to invest in that, and who's going to pay for that?
Mm-hmm.
These smart city services, we had a very good pickup on an op-ed that we did recently on smart cities. Who's going to pay? Or are these going to be a bunch of new fee-based services that we're all going to have to pay for as these technologies come in? Because they have the opportunity to really improve our lives and bring value, but who's going to pay for it? States are broke. Cities are strapped, even in a good economy. The federal government's probably not going to come in and pay for much of this. So is it going to be left to companies that come in to provide these fee-based services that we have to pay for to get? And then if the revenue potential for them is not very good in these rural communities, are they going to do it? Maybe not. So you could see, it could be like you drive into into the country, and it's like stepping into a whole other world from what you will see in urban areas where it's going to be a lot more opportunity for profit.
Lots of things to think about for the future.
Yeah.
The literal landscape could be different.
Yeah, and those all impact the jobs
mm-hmm.
that'll exist, and where the jobs will be concentrated and where they'll be attractive to base plants and businesses. So is it going to be a virtual? Is it going to be back to urban areas, which we've seen? That's been the transition so far. But can it change? People want to live in an urban area, but they work in a virtual world. That could be the case too. So it'll be interesting to see how those combinations kind of all play themselves out. And it's going to take, this is a 10, 20 year transition or more. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to happen all by 2030.
Good, because I like this office over this now.
Yeah.
I like seeing real people.
And we're getting new carpet this year, so it'll be even better.
Excellent. A future investment in the office. So we won't be moving to headsets anytime soon then, I guess.
No.
All right. Well, with that, thank you everybody for tuning in through our virtual technology. Really appreciate the support, and thank you for your thoughts.
Yep.
It's amazing to think what the world could look like in such a short amount of time. So until next time, have a great day, everybody.